Thanks for coming along with us on this video today. We're going to do some exploration of the workyard of the mansion. This is just north of the mansion, an area where enslaved people worked and lived, and not an area that a visitor during Jackson's time would have had access to primarily. The structure that you see behind me is what we refer to today as Alfred's cabin. We know that the cabin was built around 1840, but we don't really know who lived in it, any specific identity. The reason we call it Alfred's cabin today is because post-emancipation, after the Civil War, a formerly enslaved man named Alfred Jackson and his family remained living here at the Hermitage, and they moved into this cabin at that time. The cabin, as you can see, is a duplex style, so there's 2 rooms, and most of the housing for the enslaved people here at the Hermitage was a duplex type of setup. Each space individually is about 20 by 20 feet large. You can see some of what that interior looks like with a loft space above it. 20 by 20 sounds very small, and it is. We don't, unfortunately, know how all of these spaces were used by individual families or individual residents. By and large, the enslaved here lived in family units. There were many families here on the property, and based on the documentation, we know that there were multi-generational families living here. But we also know that there were many single people living here. Perhaps they never married, perhaps they had lost family members already. So even single people didn't get their own dwelling, they would have shared with others too. And inside these 20 by 20 spaces, they would typically have to house around 8 to 10 people perhaps. And so 20 by 20, you can feel that size begin to shrink pretty quickly. In these duplex spaces, and you can see an example here behind me, you would have had about 8 to 10 people living per space on average. Again, that sounds like a tremendous crush of bodies in one small space, and it is. But keep in mind, too, these folks did not have very much in the way of personal possessions in the space with them. Some pallets for sleeping, most likely, some cooking implements, some tools that they would have been assigned to work with, maybe a table and some stools. But we're talking about very basic furnishings. So all of these living quarters for the enslaved would be very fluid, and they were often used as workspaces as well. So that explains some of the shortage, we believe, of materials. The other challenge that we have with understanding their home life is that nobody recorded those sorts of details. People are much more interested in recording the lives of the Jacksons and how they have the mansion furnished and how they live and operate in the mansion. But that same attention was not really turned towards sites of enslavement or dwellings for the enslaved. The buildings that you're now seeing behind us is a complex that we call the First Hermitage. The second building behind me, you can see 2 log cabins, and the furthest building behind me was originally the farmhouse. When the Jacksons first bought the property in 1804, this is the building in which they lived. It was 2 stories initially, but lest you think they're living in some primitive frontier cabin, they had paneled walls, they had French wallpaper, they're fine in the farmhouse. But that's where the farm began, and that farmhouse. Over time, of course, the Jacksons begin to buy and enslave more people, and so they have to expand the number of buildings on site in order to accommodate them. That's when the building closest behind me was built. One half of it served as the kitchen, and the 9 people that the Jacksons enslaved at that period lived in the second half of that duplex cabin. So again, that sort of average 8 to 10 people in each space. There were 2 additional buildings right here in this space as well. Today they are just archaeological sites filled with gravel. So you can see the foundation of the building. You can see again that they're divided into duplexes, and we can get a sense of how those spaces would have been lived in and worked in based on the other standing structures here on the property. The First Hermitage, when the Jacksons buy the farm, as I mentioned, was a 2-story log home. When the mansion is completed in 1819, the family shifted their residence over to the mansion, and they adapted the First Hermitage buildings for more enslaved people to live in them. We don't know who was living here, and we don't really know how they adapted these structures, but we just know what the adaptations were. So the building that was initially the farmhouse was adapted from being a 2-story building to a 1-story building as you see it today. The story that remains here on site is the 2nd story of that building. What happened to the 1st story? We don't know. How did they get this building apart, and how did they set it back on the original footprint of that building? We don't know that either. Jackson was a very conscientious man when it came to money and how resources were used and spent, so I can't imagine they just wasted it. And so perhaps it was moved elsewhere, perhaps it was damaged and they couldn't restore it, and so they just disposed of it. One thing that we try to emphasize to all of our visitors that come to the Hermitage is that we don't have all of the information and all of the answers to all the questions that have ever been raised about the Hermitage. When you think about how you may live your life, you don't record every single instance of every single day or record every single thought and idea you ever had. And the same is true for the people living here as well. So we are constantly in the research, we are constantly digging through the documents, we are constantly testing the land itself to try to see what those resources can yield for us about information. Even the wooded lot behind me has been cleared out recently, and so even removing, acres worth of trees and undergrowth has begun to provide more information for us as well. So as you come and visit the Hermitage or visit historic sites like the Hermitage, keep in mind that this is an ever-evolving research project here before you today. Ask those questions. We may not have the answers, but it can often help us decide what's important to focus on next. What do visitors want to hear? What are the burning questions that you come with? And that helps us focus our resources and information as well.